Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more buckshot testing. And we've got another new shell out here today to try, so I'm definitely curious to see what it can do because this style of shell through this particular setup has struggled so far in our testing. So can this particular shell do any better? There's definitely a chance that it might give us some pretty decent performance, but we're just going to have to try it and see what we can get out of it. But as for the shell I've got here today, I brought out some of these. Some Winchester Super-X, 20 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 20 pellet loads of number 3 buck, moving about 1200 feet per second. Now, if you've seen the recent testing with 20 gauge, 2 and 3 buck, you know that we've seen some pretty poor performances, but those have been from the Federal Power Shock shells. So can the Winchester shells do any better? I think the biggest downfall to the Federals was that they are, number 1, not plated, and number 2, they don't have a wad. Now, unfortunately, I think it's the same story with these Super-X shells. No wad and no plating, but we'll have to see when we take the shot because they very well could perform the exact same as what we've already seen from the Federals. We're just going to have to try them and see what happens. And as for the setup I've got to run them through, I brought out the Stevens 301 here with the flush mount factory style full choke. It is a 592 constriction on this particular choke, and full chokes are typically what I like to start with the vast majority of buckshot shells. And based on the results we've seen so far from 20 gauge and buckshot, it's been completely up in the air. So I figured we'll start here and see how these shells do, and we can move from there based on what kind of results we see. But as for the test today, everything is set up the same as usual. I've got the big sheet of paper at 40 yards. I've also got the chronograph so we can get our velocity, and the templates that we can lay up over our target for a reference as to how they would do in some more real life type of scenarios. So let's get you guys a view of this target and take the shot and see just what these Winchester Super-X 3 buck shells can do, considering we've seen nothing but pretty poor performances so far from the Federal stuff we've tested. So let's head over here and see what kind of results we can get. Alright, so that shell gave us 1255 through the chrono. The boss claim was 1200, so we saw a little bit above their claim, which is something we cannot say for the Federal shells so far. So 1255 is much more like it compared to Federals like 1050 feet per second that we were getting before. So looking pretty good up here as far as velocity goes, but what kind of a pattern did it actually give us at 40 yards? Let's go down and check it out and see what we got. All right, now we're down here at our 40-yard paper, and this is what we got. Now, for a reference, the white dot was the point of aim. The target is 36 inches wide by probably about 40 or 42 inches tall. And as you can see, we have pellets covering pretty much the vast majority of it. Now, it is a 20 pellet load, and we have 19 of them on the paper. So we are missing one somewhere, but this is already much better than what we had seen with the Federals through that exact same setup. But it's still not really what I'm looking for as far as our pattern goes. Yes, it's pretty broad and wide open, which isn't always a terrible thing, but really what I'm noticing here is the lack of pellets in the core. As you can see, there's easily an 8 to 10 inch circle right there in the middle of the pattern where there's not a single pellet. All the rest of them are in a circular kind of donut shape around the core. Now, is that just luck of the draw with this one in particular shell? Maybe, but this has seemed to be a pretty common thing with 20 gauge buckshot in the few tests we've done so far with it, is these circular donut patterns. Now, is that just the chokes we're using? Maybe. We'll continue to test different chokes and see what happens. But I think the big downfall to these 20 gauge buckshot shells so far is the lack of wad and lack of plating on the pellet. So although it is definitely not as poor as what we had seen with the Federal Power Shock stuff, it's still not what I would call impressive either, and really not something that I'm looking to hunt for with this particular pattern. But let's throw a couple of quick templates up just to see what it looks like if you would have just taken this shell out into the woods and hunted with it anyway without testing it. I don't think it's going to be anything impressive, but I guess we'll take a look at a template or two anyway. Okay, here's our 10-inch circle, and I think our pattern was pretty centered up, so I centered it up on the paper, and as you can see, we had one pellet barely sneak in up there at the top of it. So that really shows right there that circular donut style pattern with no pellets in the core. I don't mind having some stragglers or flyers around the edges if our core looks really good, but if you don't have a good core that's putting pellets right where you're aiming, that's a big turn down for me on these shells, that's for sure. So 10-inch circle, not looking looking great. But I guess we'll throw the deer template up for a second and take a look at that. I don't think it's going to be very impressive, but we'll see what would have happened if you would have taken this particular shot on a deer. Okay, so here's that deer template, and when we line it up with the point of aim, we would have had 9 pellets definitely hit him. Now, I do think this would have been a dead deer for you, but he probably would have ran a pretty decent ways on you if I had to take a guess. You really don't have very much of anything right in the lungs and heart area there. Maybe these couple just to the bottom right of that white dot would have got into maybe a little bit of artery stuff coming off the heart, but you would have been pushing your luck there. So I think that deer probably would have ran a pretty decent way on you. So that really goes to show why I like to have a good number of pellets in the core area. Sure, it's good enough if you were doing deer drives or something and you had a deer come blasting by you at full speed, it would give you a good amount of leeway to work with, but as for a dedicated hunting pattern, that is not what I'm looking for. Now, can we tighten that up a little with the right choke? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe that's about the best we can get out of them. I don't know. But I guess for a start here, we're better off than we were with the Federals, but still not really even close to where I would want to be for these shells personally. All right, y'all. Well, what do you think about that result right there? Definitely a little disappointing to say the least. We are better than what we saw with the Federals, but still, that's not a pattern that I'm looking to use for any kind of actual hunting type of scenarios. For home defense, sure, at 5, 10, 15 yards, that's going to be just fine for you. But for a 40-yard hunting pattern, not what I'm wanting to see, that's for sure. I think a lot of it just has to come down to how these shells are loaded. Sure, they have buffer material, but they don't have any kind of wad, and they're not plated pellets. Both of those things seem to really help a buckshot pattern out. And when these just don't have it, there's not really much to help them out any. So I guess I'll leave it up to you guys. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of these Winchester 20 gauge 3-buck shells? And if so, what kind of results have you seen out of them? Would you use that pattern for anything? Or is that just too broad and splotchy for you? Is there another choke that you think we should run these shells through and see what kind of results we can get out of it? Let me know all your thoughts down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it. But I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.